You know how some people enter our lives exactly when we need them most, as if destiny had planned that meeting long before it happened? Have you ever had someone like that in your life? Tell me in the comments, because the story I'm going to tell today started exactly like that, with an encounter that seemed casual but changed everything forever. It was August 1993, and the sun was beating down mercilessly on the small town of Cedar Falls, Iowa, where afternoons dragged lazily and gossip traveled faster than the wind. I was 38 years old, had 2 young children, Tyler 7 and Brianna 5, and a pile of bills that grew every day, just like the dark circles under my eyes. The marriage I believed would last forever had ended 6 months ago, when Robert, my husband of 12 years, decided he preferred to start over with the secretary from the auto parts store where he worked. He left home on a Thursday, taking the TV, the stereo system, and leaving behind broken promises and child support that never arrived on time. "You'll be fine," he said that last night, without even looking into the children's eyes, as if leaving a mother with no profession, 2 small children, and overdue rent was just a minor inconvenience on his path to happiness. I did what I could. Cleaned houses 3 times a week, did laundry for neighbors, and on weekends took care of elderly people who needed companionship. It wasn't easy, but I was proud that I never let my children go without food on the table, even if it meant skipping meals when money got too tight. It was Mrs. Henderson, for whom I cleaned on Tuesdays, who told me about the job. "Susan, there's an elderly lady who needs someone to live with her, pays well, offers room and board. Her nephews contacted me. They're desperate. She's a widow, lives alone in that big house near the Methodist church, getting forgetful. They say sometimes she doesn't eat properly." My heart sank. Leave my little rented house, take the children to live in a stranger's home? But the rent was 2 months behind, and the landlord had already warned he needed the property. Besides, the idea of guaranteed housing and a steady salary was too tempting to ignore. "What's she like, Mrs. Henderson? Do you know her?" "That's Mrs. Evelyn Morrison, widow of Dr. George Morrison. He was the town doctor his whole life. They say she was a teacher before marriage but stopped when she got married. Now she's 78, no children. A bit cranky from what I hear, doesn't like much conversation, but pays on time and doesn't mistreat employees." She handed me a piece of paper with trembling hands. "Here's the address and her nephew's phone number. This could be the chance I needed, or a complete disaster." How would I care for the children while working in the house? Would she accept them living there too? 1,000 questions swirled in my head as I tucked the number into my worn apron pocket. That same night, after putting the children to bed, I looked around our small living room, the toys organized in the corner, photos on the wall, the secondhand sofa I'd bought with my savings, and dialed the number with my heart in my hand. Mrs. Morrison's nephew, a man named Paul who spoke like city people, explained the situation without beating around the bush. His aunt was becoming frail with memory lapses, and they feared leaving her alone. They needed someone to live there, prepare meals, manage medications, keep the house in order, and most importantly, provide companionship. When I mentioned Tyler and Brianna, he hesitated. For a moment, I thought everything was lost. "I'll talk to my aunt. She's reserved, has lived alone for many years, but the house is big with several empty rooms. Come talk to her tomorrow at 2 p.m. and we'll see what she thinks." The next morning, I put on my best outfit, a navy blue skirt and white blouse I saved for special occasions. I carefully fixed my hair, applied light lipstick, and prepared the children as if we were going to Sunday service. Tyler, always serious and responsible beyond his years, understood the importance of that meeting. Brianna, small and restless, just wanted to know if the new grandma would have candy. "She's not a grandma, sweetheart," I explained patiently while braiding her hair. "She's a lady who needs help, and we're going to help her. And you need to be very quiet and well-behaved, understand? Mrs. Morrison's house was exactly as people described. A mansion from another era with high walls, wrought iron gates, and a garden that, though somewhat neglected, still showed signs of having once been magnificent. The two-story Victorian construction with wide porches and tall windows seemed to observe the town from atop its aged dignity, just like its owner. It was Paul who opened the gate, accompanied by a woman who introduced herself as his wife. They guided us along the stone path to the porch, where an elderly lady with perfectly arranged white hair in a bun sat in a rocking chair, observing our arrival with attentive and suspicious eyes. Mrs. Morrison was nothing like what I had imagined. I expected to find someone frail, confused, visibly in need of help. Instead, I saw a woman with erect posture, dressed in sober elegance, a dark blue dress, a discreet pearl necklace, and a gaze so penetrating it seemed to see right through me. "So, you're Susan Mitchell," she said, her voice clear and firm without the fragility I expected. It wasn't a question, but a statement. "Yes, ma'am. You can call me Susan, and these are my children, Tyler and Brianna." The children made a small bow, as I had rehearsed with them. Tyler serious, Brianna slightly swaying her flowered dress. Mrs. Morrison observed them for a moment that seemed eternal, and then, to my surprise, her gaze softened slightly. "Well-mannered children," she commented, and turned her attention back to me. "My nephew explained your situation. I need someone to stay here full-time. The house is too big for me to manage alone, and I admit I sometimes forget small things." She made a vague gesture with her hand, as if brushing away an invisible fly. Paul cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable with his aunt's minimization of the problems. "Aunt Evelyn has had some episodes. Last week, the neighbor found her on the street in her nightgown, saying she was looking for Dr. Morrison." "George is traveling," Mrs. Morrison interrupted abruptly, a flash of irritation in her eyes. "He'll be back next week." An awkward silence fell over us. Dr. Morrison, as I would learn later, had passed away more than 15 years ago. "Anyway," Paolo continued, "we need someone reliable who can stay here all the time. There's a servant's room in the back, but—" "No, Mrs. Morrison interrupted again. "If she comes with the children, they'll stay upstairs. There are 3 empty rooms there. Choose whichever you prefer." Paul and his wife exchanged surprised looks, clearly not expecting such generosity. I was also speechless, shocked by the offer. "But Aunt," Paul began. "This is my house, Paul," she said with a firmness that left no room for discussion. "And I still decide what happens in it. The children need space, and it makes no sense to cram them into the little back room when there are so many empty rooms." She turned to me, her gray eyes evaluating me. "You cook?" "Yes, ma'am." "Know how to manage medications, schedules, those things?" "Yes, ma'am. I took care of my mother in her final years." "And these children, are they well behaved? Noisy? Do they touch what they shouldn't?" Before I could answer, Tyler stepped forward, straightening his shoulders like a little soldier. "We know how to respect adults' houses, ma'am," he said. "Mom taught us. We don't break anything, don't shout inside the house, and always ask permission." An almost smile passed across Mrs. Morrison's lips, so quickly it could have been just my imagination. "Good," she said simply, and then looked at her nephew. "She starts tomorrow. Work out the payment details and let me rest now. I'm tired." With that, she stood up with the help of a cane I hadn't noticed before and walked slowly into the house, leaving behind a trail of dignity and the gentle scent of lavender. Paul explained the work terms, a salary that was almost double what I managed to earn with my cleaning jobs and temporary work, plus housing and food for me and the children. In exchange, I would take care of everything: the house, meals, Mrs. Morrison's medications, accompany her to medical appointments, and most importantly, ensure she wasn't left alone. "She's not easy," he warned as we were leaving. "She's always been reserved, but after Uncle George died, she became even more closed off. Don't expect conversations or thanks or affection. She's not that type of person. I nodded, understanding what he wasn't saying. This wouldn't just be a job caring for a house, but an exercise in patience with someone who probably didn't want my presence there. The next day, with 2 suitcases containing everything we owned, the children and I arrived at the mansion that would be our new home. Mrs. Morrison received us with the same distant expression from the day before, showing us the upstairs rooms with brief gestures like someone giving directions to strangers. "This will be your room." She indicated a spacious room with a double bed and an antique wardrobe. "The children can stay in the room next door. The bathroom is at the end of the hall. We don't use the last room, it was George's. It's closed." Then we went downstairs so she could show me the enormous kitchen with dark wood cabinets and utensils that seemed unused for years, the pantry, the living room, the formal dining room. Each room told stories of a life of comfort and privilege, now covered by a thin layer of dust and abandonment. "I have coffee at 7, she instructed, her voice without inflection. "Lunch at noon, tea at 4 p.m., dinner at 7 p.m. I like punctuality. The medications are all in the bedside table drawer with the times noted. Don't touch the library books without permission. Don't answer the phone unless I ask. And most importantly," she paused, looking directly into my eyes, "don't talk all the time. I can't stand purposeless conversation." That last instruction hit me like a slap. I'd always been talkative, accustomed to filling silences with stories, questions, observations about the weather, or town news. The idea of working in silence day after day seemed like a punishment designed especially for me. But I was determined to make it work. For me, for the children, for the chance to rebuild our lives with a little more security. The first weeks were a test of endurance. Mrs. Morrison rigorously followed her silent routine, got up, had coffee, always the same, a cup of black coffee, a slice of bread with butter, never more, never less, sat on the porch with a book or just observing the garden, then had lunch, rested, had tea, dinner, and retired early. She rarely addressed me beyond what was necessary. "The coffee is cold." "I need to go to the doctor Thursday." "This bread is stale." The children, intimidated by the austere aura of the house and my constant warnings not to bother, moved like shadows through the corridors, playing in the backyard when they returned from school, far from the critical eyes of the lady. I did my work as best I could, cleaning every corner until it shone, preparing meals with care, administering medications at the exact time. But there was something in the atmosphere of that house, something beyond the imposed silence, beyond the coldness of its owner, that weighed on my shoulders. An ancient sadness, a loneliness so deep it seemed impregnated in the very walls. At night, when the children slept and I could finally rest, I cried silently in my room, feeling lonelier than ever. Despite having a secure roof over our heads and guaranteed food on the table, I missed conversation, laughter, human warmth. I even missed the gossip exchanged with other house cleaners, the stories shared with the elderly I cared for on weekends. It was on one of those nights of contained crying that I had an idea. If I couldn't talk to Mrs. Morrison, maybe I could communicate in another way. The next day, along with breakfast, I placed a small note on the tray. "Good morning, Mrs. Morrison. It's a beautiful day today. The white roses in the garden are starting to bloom. Have a good day. Susan." Simple like that, without questions, without forcing intimacy, just an observation and a sincere wish. When I returned to collect the tray, I noticed the note had disappeared. No comment was made, no thanks, no reprimand, just silence. But the next day I put another note, and the day after that, another. Small notes about the weather, about the garden flowers, about the bird that built a nest in the tree near the kitchen window. Never questions, never anything personal, just small observations of the world around us, like breadcrumbs left on a forest trail. In the second week of notes, I also began leaving small gifts with meals: a flower picked from the garden next to the breakfast plate, a particularly beautiful autumn leaf as a bookmark in the book she was reading, homemade candy with afternoon tea. It was after a month of this silent routine of small kindnesses that I noticed the first change. When I served breakfast with the usual little note and a small daisy picked from the garden, Mrs. Morrison looked at the flower for a long moment. Then, with fingers that seemed more fragile than I had noticed before, she picked it up delicately and placed it in her white hair, attached to her impeccable bun. "Thank you," she said so quietly I almost didn't hear. "Daisies were my favorites when I was little." They were just 2 words, but they sounded like a symphony after weeks of silence. I contained the impulse to smile openly or respond with enthusiasm. Instead, I just nodded respectfully and withdrew, my heart beating faster. That small opening was like a crack in a dam. In the following days, I noticed other subtle changes. Mrs. Morrison began making small comments about meals. "The sauce is good today," or "This bread turned out better than yesterday's." She began asking about medications instead of just taking them silently. And most surprising, she began to notice the children. One day when Tyler came home from school with a drawing he had made, a large house with a white-haired lady on the porch, and timidly offered it to Mrs. Morrison, I thought she would ignore it or worse, reprimand the gesture. Instead, she took the drawing carefully, studied it for a moment, and then said, "You have talent for lines and shapes. My husband also drew. Let's hang it on the refrigerator." Tyler's smile lit up the entire kitchen, and at that moment I felt something fundamental had changed in that silent house. A door had opened, not completely, just a crack, but it was enough to let in a little light in a place that had remained in twilight for too long. Have you ever noticed how certain relationships happen slowly, almost without us realizing it? Like threads that intertwine day after day until they form a resistant fabric that not even time can undo? Tell me in the comments, because that's how my friendship with Mrs. Morrison was born. Slow, silent, but deep like the roots of an ancient tree. The first Christmas in the house was a watershed moment. December had arrived with its typical Midwest winter cold, and I didn't know what the holiday would be like in the silent mansion. In the 3 weeks leading up to the festivities, I didn't dare ask if I could decorate the house or if the lady would like some special celebration. The little notes we exchanged daily had evolved into small conversations during meals, but there were still territories I feared to invade. It was Brianna, with the innocence of her 5 years, who broke the ice one afternoon while we were having tea on the porch, a new habit that had formed naturally, with Mrs. Morrison allowing me to accompany her instead of just serving and withdrawing. "Grandma Evelyn," Brianna suddenly asked, using the nickname she had created for the lady without anyone encouraging her, "does Santa know we're living here now?" A silence followed the question. I saw Mrs. Morrison's face transform. First surprise, then something that seemed like pain, and finally a softness she rarely showed. "I think we need to write him a letter, don't we?" she finally responded, delicately placing her cup on the saucer. "To make sure he finds you." That night, after the children were asleep, I found Mrs. Morrison in the living room looking at an old box she had retrieved from the basement. When she saw me, she did something unexpected. She invited me to sit beside her. "George and I never decorated the house for Christmas after we got married," she said, opening the box to reveal old ornaments, some clearly handmade decades ago. "We always spent the holidays with my family in Des Moines, or with his family in Chicago. But before, when I was a child, my mother transformed our house into a living nativity scene. Her fingers caressed a porcelain angel with a broken wing. Maybe it's time to resurrect some traditions for the children." The next morning, we began decorating the house. It was as if a floodgate had been opened. Mrs. Morrison, whom I had known so reserved and silent, suddenly told stories of her childhood Christmases while we hung garlands on doors. She talked about the father who always cut a pine tree from the yard to serve as a Christmas tree, about the mother who spent days preparing special treats, about siblings, all already deceased, with whom she played on Christmas night until falling asleep. The children followed her, fascinated, absorbing every word, every story like thirsty plants after a long drought, and she, in turn, seemed to flourish with their attention, with their innocent questions, with their growing excitement as the day approached. To my surprise, on December 24th, Mrs. Morrison asked me to take her to downtown Cedar Falls. "We need to buy presents," she announced, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And so, we spent the afternoon, the 78-year-old lady, leaning on my arm, walking through stores with energy I didn't imagine she possessed, carefully choosing gifts for Tyler and Brianna. "And this is for you," she said, handing me a package wrapped in golden paper when we returned home. "Don't open it until tomorrow." That night, gathered in the dining room that hadn't seen a formal dinner in months, we shared a feast we had prepared together, Mrs. Morrison, myself, and even the children who helped shape Christmas cookies following an old family recipe she recited from memory. The next day, the presents under the small tree we had decorated made the children's eyes shine. Tyler received a set of professional drawing pencils to develop his talent, as Mrs. Morrison explained. Brianna received an antique porcelain doll. "That was mine when I was your age," the lady revealed with teary eyes. When I finally opened my gift, I found a delicate cobalt blue silk shawl, obviously expensive. "It matches your eyes," Mrs. Morrison said simply while I fought back tears. It was from that Christmas that everything changed definitively. The silence that once dominated the house was gradually replaced by conversations at the table, by the sound of the radio that Mrs. Morrison now allowed to stay on during the day, by the children's laughter who no longer needed to hide in the back to be children. Paul and his wife's visits, once tense and formal, became more relaxed as they noticed the change in their aunt. They observed, surprised, how she now asked Tyler's opinion on where to hang a picture or let Brianna help her water the garden plants that gradually began to flourish again under renewed care. "I've never seen my aunt like this," Paul commented to me one day while we watched Mrs. Morrison teaching Brianna how to crochet on the porch. "Not even when Uncle George was alive. She was always contained." "Sometimes people just need a little time," I replied without elaborating further. I knew instinctively that what was happening between us, this improvised family we were forming, was something too delicate to be discussed openly. As the months passed, our routine transformed. Breakfast, once a silent and formal meal, became a moment of planning the day. Mrs. Morrison wanted to know how Tyler was doing in school, if Brianna had recovered from her cough, what the plans were for the garden that week. Afternoon tea, which she used to have alone, became a ritual expected by everyone. I prepared cookies or cake, and we gathered on the porch or on colder days in the living room by the fireplace. There, Mrs. Morrison began sharing stories of her youth as an elementary teacher before marriage, of the 1940s dances where she met George, of life as a doctor's wife in an era when that carried specific social responsibilities. "I had to leave the classroom when we got married," she told us one afternoon while rain beat against the windows. "It was expected. The doctor's wife couldn't work. She had to be available to receive guests, to accompany him to events, to do volunteer work at church." For a long time, I resented that, the freedom I lost, the purpose. Her eyes, clouded by age but still penetrating, fixed on some distant point beyond the house walls. George was a good man. He never directly prevented me from anything, but there were expectations from his family, from society, and I was too young to question them. These confidences, offered in fragments over quiet afternoons, allowed me to piece together the puzzle that was Evelyn Morrison. I began to understand the origin of that rigidity, that silence, that distance she maintained from the world. She was a woman who had sacrificed her own dreams in the name of others' expectations, who had molded herself to the role assigned to her until her true essence was hidden so deeply that perhaps not even she knew where to find it anymore. One night, after the children were already in bed, I found her in the library, the sanctuary that was once practically forbidden to me, but that we now frequented together regularly. She was leafing through an old photo album, silent tears running down her wrinkled face. My first impulse was to retreat, leave her with her privacy, but something made me stay. "May I see?" I asked gently, sitting beside her on the leather sofa. She nodded, passing me the album open to a page, showing a young couple, her and George presumably, smiling in front of a small, simple house, very different from the mansion where we were. "Our first house," she explained, her voice choked. "Before we moved here, before he became the most respected doctor in the region, before everything." I looked at the photograph carefully. The young Evelyn in the photo barely resembled the lady beside me. Not just because of the obvious youth, but because of the open expression, the genuine smile that illuminated her face. It was the portrait of someone full of hope, plans, joy. "We were happy there," she continued, turning the page to show more photos from that era. "The house was small, but it was ours. I still taught. George worked at the municipal health clinic and was starting his private practice. We didn't have much, but we had purpose." "What changed?" I asked, feeling she wanted, needed to talk about it. "Success," she replied simply. "George's clinic prospered. We bought this house, entered society. Suddenly there were dinners to organize, appearances to maintain, expectations to fulfill. And without realizing it, we grew apart. Not physically, George was always a present husband in his way, but we lost ourselves, who we were when we met." She turned a few more pages, showing photos of the current house newly acquired, of social events, of trips. In each one, I noticed how her smile became more contained, her gaze more distant. "We always wanted children," she revealed, reaching pages that showed only the two of them aging over the years. "But they didn't come. At the time, doctors said it was my problem, although today we know men can also be the cause. George never blamed me openly, but I felt I had disappointed him, that I had failed in a wife's most fundamental role." Her trembling hands closed the photo album and placed it carefully on the side table. For a moment, we sat in silence, only the tick-tock of the pendulum clock and the occasional sound of rain against the windows filling the space between us. "When George died," she finally continued, "I felt completely lost. Not just from the pain of loss, but because I no longer knew who I was without him. I had spent so much time being Dr. Morrison's wife that I had forgotten how to be just Evelyn. Instinctively, I took her wrinkled hand between mine. To my surprise, she didn't withdraw it. That's why I closed myself off," she confessed. "Silence was easier than facing the emptiness. Loneliness was preferable to trying to explain to people what I myself didn't understand, that I had lost my identity long before I lost my husband." That night, something fundamental changed between us. It was no longer just an employee-employer relationship, nor even caregiver and elderly person. It was a budding friendship built on a foundation of mutual understanding and respect. Two women who, despite differences in age and experience, shared similar wounds. The feeling of having lived in the shadow of others' expectations, of having lost parts of themselves along the way. In the months that followed, our routine transformed even more. Now we had coffee together every morning on the porch, planning the day. She began asking me about my life, my failed marriage, my interrupted dreams. "I always wanted to have studied more. I confided one morning while watching Tyler and Brianna walk to school. I only managed to finish elementary school. I married too young, had children too young. Robert didn't like me having ideas, as he put it. Mrs. Morrison frowned, that severe expression that now I knew hid deep indignation. It's never too late to learn, Susan. Look at me. I'm learning to be a different person at 78. You have your whole life ahead of you. The following week, she surprised me by bringing books, simple novels at first, then some more elaborate ones, GED study materials. Let's study together, she proposed with that tone that admitted no refusal. My mind is getting lazy with age. Teaching you will keep me alert. And so began our nightly study sessions after the children were in bed. Under her patient tutelage, I rediscovered the pleasure of learning. She had been a teacher, after all, and knew exactly how to explain difficult concepts in ways I could understand. With her encouragement, I enrolled in GED classes, and at 39, I resumed the formal education I had abandoned decades before. The children also flourished in this new environment. Tyler, always responsible, found in Mrs. Morrison a mentor who valued his intelligence and creativity. She began helping him with homework, discussing books with him, encouraging his drawing talent with quality materials and guidance. Brianna, in turn, conquered the elderly woman's heart with her spontaneous joy and infinite curiosity. The two developed their own rituals. Brianna helped Mrs. Morrison feed the birds every morning, and the lady taught the girl to crochet exactly as her grandmother had taught her so many decades ago. The house, once silent and gloomy, now lived. Windows remained open during the day, letting in fresh air and light. The radio played in the kitchen while I prepared meals, often with Mrs. Morrison beside me, passing on old family recipes. The garden, under our combined care, began to flourish again, becoming the neighborhood's pride. Neighbors who once kept their distance began making occasional visits, bringing sweets or just stopping by for coffee. To my surprise, Mrs. Morrison received them with a cordiality she had never shown before. I isolated myself for too long, she admitted after one of these visits. I thought it was easier to push people away than let them see my loneliness, my fragility. But you and the children showed me there's more strength in opening up than in closing off. One Sunday a month became special lunch day. I prepared elaborate dishes following recipes she taught me, and we invited Paul and his family, some close neighbors, and even my sister Carol and her family who lived on the other side of town. In the first few times, I felt uncomfortable, not knowing my place at those gatherings, whether I was a hostess alongside Mrs. Morrison or just the employee serving at the table. But she resolved this with her new characteristic frankness. "Sit down, Susan," she ordered the first time I tried to retreat to the kitchen after serving lunch. "This is as much your house as mine now. We're a family." Family. The word fell like a bomb on my wounded heart. I looked at Tyler and Brianna sitting at the table with the other guests, perfectly at ease, treated like beloved grandchildren and not like the employees' children. I looked at Mrs. Morrison, who had transformed so much in recent months that sometimes I barely recognized the cold and distant woman I had initially met, and I understood it was true. We were a family, not by blood, not by surname, but by choice, by affinity, by mutual care. A family built day after day in small gestures of attention and respect, in conversations on the porch, in shared lessons, in comfortable silences that no longer carried distance but intimacy. The years passed. Tyler entered adolescence, growing in height and seriousness. His talent for drawing evolved into an interest in architecture, encouraged by Mrs. Morrison, who began showing him books on the subject and taking him to observe historic buildings in neighboring towns. Brianna, always sunny, became a little helper in the kitchen, loving to prepare desserts that Mrs. Morrison praised with sincere pleasure. I completed my GED with excellent grades thanks to our nightly study sessions. At graduation, Mrs. Morrison was in the front row, as proud as if I were her own daughter. "The next step is nursing school," she announced on the way home. "You have a gift for caring for people. You should turn it into a profession." "But who would take care of you in the house?" I asked, surprised by the suggestion. "I'm not an invalid yet," she replied, with a raised eyebrow that made me smile. "And the children are more independent now. We can adjust. The important thing is that you keep growing, Susan. You can't spend your life just taking care of others." It was a lesson she herself had learned late and now strove to teach me earlier. And so, with her encouragement and financial support, I enrolled in nursing school the following year. The children, now 11 and 9, were quite independent, and Mrs. Morrison, despite being 81, remained lucid and active, naturally taking on more responsibilities in the house while I studied. It was during my second year of nursing school that the first scare happened. I returned from class one night and found Mrs. Morrison fallen in the bathroom, conscious but unable to get up alone. She had slipped, and although she hadn't broken anything, the episode alerted us to her growing fragility. "Maybe we should consider hiring a helper," I suggested in the following days, worried about leaving her alone while I was at school. "Nonsense," she replied with the stubbornness I knew well. "It was just a slip, could happen to anyone." But other signs began to appear, small forgetfulnesses, where she had put her glasses, if she had already taken her blood pressure medication, what we had agreed on for dinner. Nothing alarming, nothing that couldn't be attributed to age, but it worried me, especially since I now understood the risks better thanks to nursing school. We began making discreet adaptations. I installed grab bars in the bathroom, changed locks to easier-to-operate versions, started leaving reminder notes about medications and appointments. Paul and his wife began visiting more frequently, often without warning, clearly checking if everything was okay. But most notable was how, instead of resisting these changes, Mrs. Morrison accepted them with quiet dignity. "I'm getting old, Susan," she told me one night while we crocheted together in the living room, another activity we had begun sharing. "I'm not afraid of it. I've had a long life, and the last years have been the happiest thanks to you and the children." Her words moved me deeply. I thought about how our lives had intertwined, how this woman who had initially intimidated me so much had become practically a mother to me, a grandmother to my children. "You've given us much more than we've given you," I replied, feeling gratitude tighten my throat. "A home, stability, education." "Nonsense," she interrupted with that brusque tone she never completely lost. "You gave me life again. That's priceless." In the following years, we established a routine that accommodated everyone's needs. I completed nursing school and got a part-time job at the local health clinic, applying my knowledge while still caring for Mrs. Morrison and the house. Tyler, now 15, entered high school with plans to take college entrance exams for architecture. Brianna, at 13, showed talent for music, taking piano lessons financed by Mrs. Morrison, who loved hearing her practice on the old living room piano that had been silent for decades. Our unconventional family faced challenges together. When Tyler had his first serious disagreement at school, it was Mrs. Morrison who sat him down for a frank conversation about responsibility and respect. When Brianna began showing signs of adolescence, questioning rules and testing limits, the wise lady advised me to give space for her to discover her own path without suffocating her vibrant personality. And when I occasionally received calls from Robert, who suddenly became interested in the children again after years of absence, it was Mrs. Morrison who gave me strength to maintain necessary boundaries to protect the family nucleus we had built. "He lost the right to make demands when he abandoned you," she said firmly. "The children can see him if they want, but on your terms, not his." In the winter of 2000, when Mrs. Morrison turned 85, we organized a surprise party. We gathered former teacher colleagues, neighbors, church friends she had returned to attending, Paul and his family, my sister Carol and her husband. the house filled with voices and laughter, children running through the corridors, music from the old record player we had resurrected from the basement. Watching her that afternoon, sitting in her favorite chair surrounded by people who loved her, I smiled, remembering the cold and distant lady I had met 7 years before. Now she laughed openly, told stories, accepted hugs and kisses from children with visible joy. When everyone had left and it was just the 4 of us, me, her, Tyler, and Brianna, sitting on the porch enjoying the evening breeze, she held my hand with surprising strength for someone her age. "Thank you for today," she said simply. "For everything." "We're the ones who should thank you," I replied, looking at my children's smiling faces. "You've given us so much more than a house." "I know," she agreed with that gleam in her eyes that meant she was about to say something important. "And that's why I want you to know about a decision I've made. Paul is coming tomorrow with the lawyer. I've made a new will." I was surprised, not expecting this topic on such a happy night. "Mrs. Morrison, we don't need to talk about this now." "Of course we do," she interrupted firmly. "Nobody lives forever, Susan, and I like to keep things in order. Paul has always known he would inherit half of my assets. He's my only living relative, after all. But the other half, including this house. Well, you're my family, too. The family I chose. And I want you to stay here, to take care of this place that came back to life with you." I was speechless. The children, too, understanding even in their youth the magnitude of that gesture. "But you're going to live many more years," Brianna said finally, breaking the silence, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "We don't need to think about this now." Mrs. Morrison smiled that smile that had become so familiar and precious to us. "Of course, my dear, many more years. But it's good to know that when I'm gone, you'll be taking care of each other, and this house I love so much." And it was true. She still had many years ahead. Years in which we continued building memories together, in which I watched my children grow under her wise influence, in which our unconventional family grew even stronger. Tyler entered architecture college in Des Moines, but came home every weekend, often bringing projects to show Mrs. Morrison, who examined them with genuine interest and insightful comments. Brianna finished high school and decided to pursue music with the ladies' full support, who insisted on buying a new piano when the old one could no longer be adequately restored. And I, who had entered that house as a desperate employee needing a job, found not only financial security, but purpose. My work as a nurse at the health clinic evolved into a coordination position thanks to Mrs. Morrison's constant encouragement for me to continue studying and improving myself. Most importantly, I found a complete family. Not just my children, but this extraordinary woman who had entered our lives by chance and become the center of our small universe. Our story wasn't conventional. There were no blood ties, no initial legal obligations. There was only what we built day after day: respect, mutual care, affection that grew slowly until it became deep and lasting love. A bond that time stitched stitch by stitch with invisible but indestructible threads, uniting 2 women from different backgrounds and 3 generations under the same roof, creating a family where before there had been only loneliness. Sometimes life brings us close to people who transform our world in ways we could never have imagined. And when that happens, it's not just gratitude we feel, but something deeper, an understanding that some encounters are true gifts from destiny. Have you ever experienced something like this? Tell me below, because the story I'm sharing today is about love that transcends blood and completely redefined my understanding of what family means. The winter of 2006 arrived cold and relentless, punishing our small Iowa town with temperatures that made us light the fireplace daily. Mrs. Morrison, now 91, felt the effects of the season more than anyone. Her bones, fragile with age, seemed to suffer with every temperature change. She had aged gracefully over the years, maintaining a sharp mind and strong spirit even when her body began to fail. In recent months, however, I noticed worrying changes. She tired more easily, sometimes lost balance when getting up from bed, and the cough that started with the cold took weeks to pass. Tyler, now 20 and in his third year of architecture, came home every weekend, bringing new life to the mansion with his college stories and ambitious projects. Brianna, at 18, was in her first year of music at the same university as her brother, equally returning on weekends to fill the house with melodies on the living room piano. I, at 51, divided my time between work at the health clinic and increasingly intensive care for Mrs. Morrison. I had hired a helper for mornings when I was at work, but insisted on personally caring for her the rest of the day. It wasn't an obligation. It was pure and simple love. This woman had become my family as much as my own children. We had shared 13 years of life, watched my children grow, transformed a silent house into a home, built a family where before there had been only loneliness. It was on a particularly cold July morning that I received the phone call at work. Joan, the helper who stayed with Mrs. Morrison in the mornings, was panicking. "Susan, Mrs. Morrison fell. She was going to the bathroom and fell. I can't lift her, and she's in a lot of pain in her leg." I ran home, my heart racing with fear. I found Mrs. Morrison on the hallway floor, conscious but visibly in pain, her face contorted in a grimace she was bravely trying to disguise when she saw me. "How silly of me," she said, trying to smile. "I slipped like a fool." But I knew, with my years of nursing experience, that it wasn't just a slip. The leg was at a strange angle, and swelling was already beginning to appear. A hip fracture, any elderly person's nightmare. The ambulance took her to the regional hospital, where the suspicion was confirmed. Fracture of the femur neck, requiring immediate surgery. I spent the entire night at her side in the ward, watching her sleeping face after medication, so vulnerable as I had never seen her before. The surgery was successful, but recovery would be long. When we brought her home a week later, it was a different Mrs. Morrison who crossed that door, physically diminished, dependent, needing help with the most basic tasks. "I hate being a burden," she murmured when I helped her settle into her bed, now moved to the ground floor study since stairs had become impossible. "You'll never be a burden," I replied firmly, adjusting the pillows under her head. "You took care of us for so many years. Now it's our turn to take care of you." We reorganized our lives around her needs. Tyler temporarily transferred his studies to distance learning to be more present. Bianca continued going to classes, but spent every afternoon playing piano for Mrs. Morrison, who always said music was the best medicine. I reduced my hours at the health clinic, focusing more on administrative work I could do partially from home. In the first months after surgery, there was progress. Mrs. Morrison started physical therapy, first in bed, then with a walker. Her determination was admirable. The same willpower that had sustained her for 9 decades didn't abandon her now. But sometimes the body has its own plans. Pneumonia at the end of winter weakened her significantly. Recovery was slow, leaving her more fragile than before. And then, when spring began to color the garden she loved so much, heart failure took her back to the hospital. "I'm not ready to go," she confessed to me one night when we were alone in the hospital room, her frail hand squeezing mine with surprising strength. "I still have so much to see. Tyler graduating, Brianna giving her first solo recital, you finally taking a decent vacation to see the ocean." "And you're going to see all of that," I replied, swallowing the tears that threatened to fall. "We're far from finishing our story together." But we both knew, without needing to say it out loud, that time was running out. When we returned home after 2 weeks in the hospital, Mrs. Morrison asked to be installed on the porch where she could see the garden in bloom. "I want to talk to Paul," she announced the next morning, "and to Dr. Matthews, my lawyer. There are matters that need to be resolved." I didn't argue. I knew her too well to try to dissuade her when she made a decision. Paul arrived the same day, his face worried seeing his aunt so debilitated. Dr. Matthews, a gentleman almost as elderly as she, appeared the next morning with his leather briefcase under his arm. They met in the improvised room, doors closed, for almost 2 hours. When they came out, Paul had red eyes but smiled gently at me. "She wants to talk to you now," he said, squeezing my shoulder as he passed. Alone, I found Mrs. Morrison sitting in bed, leaning against pillows, looking exhausted but strangely serene. Her eyes, though tired, had that gleam of determination I knew so well. "Sit down, Susan," she said, indicating the chair beside the bed. When I obeyed, she took my hand between hers, her thin, wrinkled fingers tracing circles on my palm. "We need to talk about the future." "Mrs. Morrison, you're going to be fine," I began, but she raised a hand to silence me. "We didn't come here to lie to each other, my dear. We've always been honest, and we're not going to stop now." She paused, breathing deeply. "I'm dying, Susan. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And I need to be sure you'll be okay when I'm gone." The tears I had held back for weeks finally overflowed. I didn't try to hide them. There was no need to pretend strength before this woman who knew me inside and out. "I made a new will," she continued, her voice firm despite the obvious difficulty breathing. "I confirmed what I had already decided years ago. This house, all the furniture, my investments, everything divided half to Paul, who is my blood and has always cared for me in his way, and half to you and the children, who are the family I chose at the end of life." "Mrs. Morrison," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion, "you've already given us so much." "We don't need—" "It's not about needing, Susan," she interrupted, squeezing my hand. "It's about deserving. You deserve it, and more than that, this house deserves to continue being a home full of music, laughter, life, as you made it be again." She reached for the nightstand, taking an envelope the lawyer had left. "It's all here, documented and legal. Paul agreed to everything. He has his own house, his own family. He knows this place belongs to you as much as to me." I took the envelope with trembling hands, unable to respond. What do you say to someone who not only changes your life, but guarantees your future, your children's future? "I'm not doing this as payment," she continued, as if reading my thoughts. "What we had goes far beyond services rendered or money. You cared for me with your heart, Susan. The house, the money, that's not reward. It's continuity. It's so that what we built together doesn't end when I'm gone." That night, gathered around her bed, me, Tyler, Brianna, we heard stories of Mrs. Morrison's youth, stories she had told before, but that gained new dimension now as a legacy being passed on. She spoke of 1940s dances, of how she met George, of her youthful dreams, her disappointments and joys. "I lived a long life," she said, looking at each of us with those eyes that, despite age, never lost their intensity. "With ups and downs like any life, but the last 13 years were the best. You gave me something I thought I'd never have, a true family, not bound by obligation or blood, but by daily choice, by genuine love." The following weeks were a precious and bittersweet time. Mrs. Morrison had good days and bad days. On good days, she sat on the porch, watched the garden, listened to Brianna play piano, reviewed Tyler's projects, discussed books with me. On bad days, she slept a lot, breathed with difficulty, sometimes confused the present with the past. It was on one of those bad days that she called me close, her voice almost a whisper. "I want a white rose," she said, her eyes half closed with fatigue. "When the time comes, a white rose with me." I understood what she was asking. I nodded, unable to speak, holding her hand until she fell asleep again. The call came on a Tuesday. I was at work when Tyler called, his voice controlled but tense. "Mom, come home. I think it's time." When I arrived, Mrs. Morrison was unconscious, her breathing irregular and shallow. The doctor had already been there and left, making it clear there was nothing more to do except keep her comfortable. Tyler and Brianna were beside the bed, holding her hands, their faces marked by silent tears. I joined them, forming a circle around the woman who had transformed our lives in ways we never could have imagined 13 years before when we first crossed that door. For hours we took turns talking to her, even without knowing if she could hear us. We recalled happy moments, expressed our gratitude, said everything that needed to be said. And then, as if waiting only for that, for this final confirmation that we were truly a family, Mrs. Morrison departed silently, her breathing simply ceasing between one moment and the next. The wake was simple, as she would have wished. Only the closest ones. We three, Paul and his family, some old neighbors, former teacher colleagues, church friends. The house she loved so much welcomed her farewell, windows open letting in the perfumed breeze from the garden in bloom. In the coffin, I placed the white rose she had requested, and with it, discreetly folded in her hand, one last little note like those that had started our friendship so many years before. "Thank you for being my mother, even without giving birth to me." When everyone had left and it was just the three of us, me, Tyler, and Brianna, sitting on the porch where we had spent so many afternoons with Mrs. Morrison, the silence between us was heavy, but also strangely comforting. There was no need for words to express what we felt. We were a family facing a profound loss, but together. "What will we do now, Mom?" Tyler asked finally, his voice deep, broken by contained emotion. I looked at my children's faces. No longer children, but young adults shaped by the years in that house, by the love of that extraordinary woman who had departed. "We continue," I replied simply. Exactly as she wanted. We continue living, growing, transforming this house into a home, honoring what she gave us, not just with gratitude, but with actions. And that's what we did in the days and weeks that followed. We faced grief together, each in their own way. Brianna played piano for hours, the sad melodies giving voice to pain that words couldn't express. Tyler took refuge in studies and restoration projects for the house, as if preserving the physical space could keep her memory alive. I dedicated myself to the garden Mrs. Morrison loved so much, talking to her in my thoughts while caring for each plant. Paul scrupulously fulfilled his aunt's wishes. The will was validated without contest. The house and half the assets were officially transferred to my name. The other half, as Mrs. Morrison had determined, went to him, fair recognition for the care and respect he always showed her, even when he didn't completely understand her choices. Life continued, as it always does. Tyler completed his architecture degree, establishing a small office in Mrs. Morrison's former room, which we transformed into a bright and welcoming workspace. Brianna continued with music, giving piano lessons to children in the room where she once played for our dear elderly lady. I myself, at 52, continued at the health clinic, now as coordinator of the elderly health program. The experience with Mrs. Morrison had given me not just technical knowledge, but a deep understanding of the emotional and psychological needs of older adults, something no book or course could teach. And the house, the big, silent house that once intimidated me so much, officially became our home. We didn't change much in it. We kept the antique furniture, the photographs on the walls, the books in the library. But we let in more light, more air, more life, exactly as we had done in the 13 years we spent with Mrs. Morrison. Sometimes, especially in the beginning, I felt her presence, a scent of lavender passing through the hallway, the sound of the rocking chair moving slightly on the empty porch, the sensation of an attentive gaze while I prepared coffee in the kitchen. These weren't frightening experiences, but comforting ones, as if she were making sure we were okay, that we were honoring her legacy. We were. Not just caring for the house and material goods she left us, but cultivating the values she transmitted to us: education, refinement without arrogance, generosity without ostentation, affection without dependence. Values that transformed 3 broken lives into a strong and united family. Mrs. Morrison's will was much more than a legal document. It was a testament of gratitude, the final confirmation that the bonds we built over the years were as real and significant as any blood connection. It was recognition that family is much more than sharing surnames or DNA. It's sharing life day after day, in small gestures of care, in daily choices to stay together despite difficulties. It was the last gift from a woman who learned in the autumn of life that it's never too late to open your heart, to let love in, to build something new and precious that will endure far beyond our earthly existence. Have you ever stopped to think about how certain houses seem to have their own soul? How walls guard more than just objects, but memories, feelings, stories that remain alive even when people are no longer there? If you've ever felt this, leave a comment below, because this is the story of a house that came to life through the love of those who lived in it. Today, 30 years after that first meeting, I'm a 68-year-old lady with gray hair and wrinkles that tell stories of laughter and tears, sitting on this same porch where Mrs. Morrison first received me, watching the blooming garden while my grandchildren run on the grass, filling the air with their laughter. The house that was once silent and intimidating now overflows with life. Tyler, my son, became an architect specializing in historic home restoration, a direct influence from Mrs. Morrison and the conversations they had about preserving the past while embracing the future. He married Lisa and gave me 2 wonderful grandchildren, Peter, 12, who inherited his father's talent for drawing, and Claire, 9, whom we named in honor of my mother. Brianna followed the path of music, graduating in piano and opening a small school in downtown Cedar Falls. Her son, Michael, 7, runs through the same halls where she played, bringing the same sunny joy that was always her trademark. As for me, I retired from the health clinic but remain active, teaching nursing and collaborating with the municipal nursing home. It's my way of honoring Mrs. Morrison's memory, transforming into service to others everything I learned with her. In the room that was hers, we maintain a small corner of memory, a photograph where she smiles genuinely with little Brianna at her side at the piano, her dark wooden rosary, the little recipe notebook she patiently taught me to prepare. It's not a somber shrine, but a living space of remembrance and gratitude. The children grew up hearing stories about Grandma Evelyn, as we affectionately call her. For them, who never knew her personally, she's almost a mythical figure, the elegant and wise lady who changed our family's destiny, who gave us not just a roof, but a home, a story, a legacy. "Tell again how you met," Peter often asks on nights when he sleeps here. And I tell it, always with some variations, but keeping the true essence, the unlikely encounter between a desperate housekeeper with 2 small children and a lonely widow in a house too big for one person. "And was she really stern at first?" Claire asks, fascinated by the character's transformation. "Not stern," I correct gently. "Just sad, lonely, afraid to open up. Sometimes when we're hurt inside, we put on a hard shell outside to protect ourselves." Mrs. Morrison's legacy goes far beyond the house and material goods. It's a legacy of values, of lessons about dignity and resilience, about the human capacity for transformation at any age. It's a legacy of love that transcends blood, proving that families can be built on foundations of respect and mutual care. The house that could have become just a real estate investment after its owner's death continues to be a vibrant home, exactly as she wished. Necessary modernizations were made with respect for the place's history, but the essence, the soul of the house remains intact. She taught me what not even my mother could, I sometimes confide to my daughter-in-law Lisa. She gave me a lap when no one else would. I didn't just inherit the house. I inherited courage, I inherited tenderness, I inherited the certainty that true bonds don't need blood, just time and care. On silent nights when everyone has already retired, I sit on the porch and talk in thought with Mrs. Morrison. I tell her about the family, about how we keep her memory alive through the small traditions we established together. 5 o'clock tea, special recipes, flowers always present on the table. Our story isn't conventional. It began with 2 broken women, each in her own way, one by loneliness after decades living in her husband's shadow, the other by abandonment and the weight of raising 2 children alone. There was no logical reason for us to work out, to become family. And yet something happened in those 13 years we shared, something that transcended our differences and found common ground in shared humanity, in the universal need for connection, for belonging. "Grandma," my grandson Peter asked me recently, "do you miss Grandma Evelyn?" "Every day," I replied honestly. "But I also find her every day, in your talent for drawing that she was the first to recognize, in the way your sister sits at the piano, in the scent of roses from the garden we planted together. People we love never completely leave us, Peter. They keep living through what they taught us, what we built together." This is my story, a story of unlikely encounters, second chances, love that transcends social conventions. A story that proves family can be found in the most unexpected places, that deep bonds can be woven between people the world would see as too different to connect. If there's one thing I learned from Mrs. Morrison, it's that it's never too late to open your heart, to let love transform us, to build something beautiful from the fragments of what we once were. And that love, that family we built together, continues. It lives in this house full of laughter, in my children who became caring adults, in my grandchildren who are growing up knowing they are deeply loved, in the certainty that some bonds transcend time and death. Mrs. Morrison may have left us, but her legacy remains, not just in bricks and mortar, but in hearts transformed by love, in lives redirected by unexpected kindness, in the understanding that true family is built day by day, choice by choice, in small gestures of care that, accumulated over time, become something magnificent and eternal. If you've made it this far in my story, thank you for listening. Sometimes the most important stories are the quiet ones, about ordinary people who find extraordinary love in unexpected places. Have you ever experienced something similar? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story too.